Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics. You're listening to us on SiriusXM Radio, or maybe you're watching our podcast on our website, maybe even the video of it. I'm joined now by Peder Zane, who writes a column for us. Peder also does some editing, Real Clear Investigations. He's a jack of all trades, good thinker, and that's what I want to talk to you about, Peder. This piece, first of all, just tell our listeners a little bit about this and our viewers about this column you wrote, and then we're going to talk about it because I have some questions.
Well, I mean, Happy New Year, first of all. And the guy who edits me over at Real Clear Politics always likes to have a little hope in columns. And I've been writing for you for years, and it's beginning to sink in a little bit. So as I was thinking about, the real failures that have been exposed in mainstream coverage of the Biden White House in particular, now that the Wall Street Journal came out with this story that showed basically what we all knew, which not only that Biden has been diminished for years, but the import of their reporting was getting people on the record to say what people close to Biden did to not only cover this up, but to govern in spite of the president's challenges. And the fact that many of our colleagues at legacy media, such as New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, CNN, did not pursue this story at all, and in fact worked to dismiss it and to go after those who suggested that the president was diminished, is a huge scandal. But the hope that you've instilled in me, Carl, is I think there's a chance for those same Main Street outlets, which have phenomenal reporting chops, to redeem themselves somewhat by pursuing this story of the effort to rule in Biden's name.
All right, well, let's talk about this because there's so many components to this, and you call it a scandal, and I think that's the right word. We had, we've had this once before in American history. It was Woodrow Wilson. We don't really even know to this day exactly what happened. Usually it's said he had a stroke. He may have also had been debilitated by the flu virus,
Right.
the COVID of the time, 1918 influenza. But he was not, his capacity was greatly reduced. And his wife, Edith Wilson, controlled access to him in a very stark way. And, before White Houses had big chief of staffs, and it wasn't really clear who the president was. We wouldn't think 100 years later you could have that again. We're in the television age, we're in the internet age. Joe Biden was not incapacitated physically in the way Wilson was. He gave
Right.
he gave a speech. He spoke. He gave remarks on New Year's Day in the evening after this attack in New Orleans, and was didn't take any questions, but he was cogent. He was he's there. He's not a zero. He's not a vegetable, but he's diminished from what he was. And so the question, one of the questions it raises is, well, has he been running the country, or has it been these other people? And if so, who? And by what right did they have to do that? So that's the question. And what your column explores is the role of the media in, instead of exposing this, sort of covering it up. Is that too strong a term?
No, I think they absolutely were. And the greatest evidence for that is that I don't think the Wall Street Journal story was any surprise to people who read many of the links at Real Clear Politics, stories that we've written at Real Clear Investigations. This was not a secret that this man was diminished. And certainly when he was forced out of the race after his bumbling and stumbling, to put it nicely, debate performance, he was removed from the ticket because of his diminished capacity, not because of his policies.
That's right.
Not whatever.
And he was pressured, and it was clear then that there was a problem. Peder, I wanted to ask you a question. As far as I know, I could be mistaken. Correct me if I am. I do not think Kamala Harris has held a press conference to this day, but she was chosen as the nominee. A full, and I think the question
Right.
she was afraid of having to answer, she gave some interviews to friendly outlets, But what a tough, hard-boiled, what we used to call ink stain
Right.
wretch like you and me would have asked us, Madam Vice President, are you sitting here telling the American people today that you learned something on June 27th that you didn't know before? That's the question, and
Right.
whatever form. She was never really asked that question. She was finally asked it in a kind of roundabout way, and she dodged it. But so, was Kamala Harris? We don't think she was making policy. Was it the White House Chief of Staff? Was it Jill Biden? Was it a consortium of these people? These are questions that need to be asked and answered.
So,
But I want to ask about your point. The point of your column is very interesting because it's the role of the media. And I covered the White House for 15 years. We have a reporter there now, Phil Wegman. He's
right.
he's very diligent, but it's hard to get access. It's hard to, you know, it is hard to know what was going on. And from my standpoint, what bothered me the most wasn't that we didn't get this story. Maybe this story wasn't gettable.
Right.
Maybe you suggest they were trying hard enough, but I'll grant you that. But even if you were, the Wall Street Journal did another story earlier, I think in the summer, about this.
They did.
It was more speculative. They had some sources. They'd interviewed people who talked to Biden, and Biden was in and out. Some people yeah, he's pretty good. He was lucid. Other people said, no, he wasn't. So the picture that emerged gradually was a guy who was every bit his 82 years of age, and some days he had good days and some days he didn't. Some days he was with it, some days he wasn't, but he was diminished from what he had been before. But
100%. I
but
mean,
what
and
but
I'll,
what bothered me, and I want to ask you about
yeah,
this. I don't mean to
no.
take all your time here, Peter, is it wasn't just that reporters didn't get that story and nail it down. It was that people who raised the issue were attacked by other journalists.
Oh, exactly. They're deeply complicit. They have totally revealed that they are partisan, and we have so many instances of that. We have the Robert Mueller RussiaGate hoax. We have the Hunter Biden laptop. We have the coverage of Hunter Biden's sweetheart deal with David Weiss. All of these things that are just juicy political stories, and that was one of the things I wanted to just mention. In my column was, I mean, this is a great story. How and when the people around Biden decide to slowly take power from him. How did that unfold? It is a fantastic story. And the people at the Post and the Times and NPR, they are terrific reporters. They could get this story if they wanted it. And so I would say that they didn't get it is an egregious indictment. And I think all the people who were covering the White House that covered this up and their editors, need to be held account. But I think they now have an opportunity to make some amends. Do I think it's going to reverse the historic low trust in legacy media? No, I don't.
You know what? It might help if
It might help.
If Washington Post did the kind of story you're talking about, and certainly they have the horses to do it.
They do.
There, I think people, conservatives would have to grudgingly admit, okay, they did it. It was too late. It was a little late, but they did it. They finally did it. And I agree with you. I think that would be that would be a they gave all these Pulitzers to these phony stories about
Right.
Russiagate. They give one for that.
Can I? One more small point I want to add, which I did not.
Before you do, let me reintroduce you. You're talking. I'm
Sure.
Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief for Real Clear Politics. You're listening to us either on Sirius XM Radio on our podcast at Real Clear, and I'm talking now with Peder Zane. That's Peder.
Right.
If you ever want to send him an email, and he wrote this very provocative column saying that the legacy media kind of blew it. And the White House press corps didn't distinguish itself in covering President Biden's decline, but that there was an opportunity to make amends and to get back, more importantly, to get back to doing real journalism.
The one point, because my column got to be a little long, that I didn't make, which I think is important, is because the media is not holding Democrats in particular to account, I think adds to the super partisan nature of our politics. So if they do nothing about this, it's very likely that the Republicans may feel the need to look into what went on. And that is by its nature partisan and political. And I think one of the reasons that we are among many that we are so divided is that neither party wants to really, hold its own to account. I mean, the press is not holding people to account, and when the press doesn't hold people to account, politicians will also jump into the breach. So I think that if we had a media that was doing its job, uh, we would be a little less divided if they were doing it fairly. Hold Trump to account, totally, but also hold the other side. Um,
I think that's right. I was thinking back, covering, as I said, I covered the White House for a long time. The most famous example of covering up for president's health is Franklin Roosevelt, who was
right.
rarely photographed in a wheelchair. The sensibilities in the country were different then, but Roosevelt was a president that, the country voted into office overwhelmingly. You had the Depression, then he was a wartime president. There was an idea that we shouldn't do that. Well, that's not the way it is now. If presidents stumble or they show infirmities, we write about it, we talk about it. This kind of the last 3 years, especially in Biden, it was more like going back to the Roosevelt time. It was, but it wasn't, but it wasn't done for, sensitivity about the aging process. It was done, you and I believe, for partisan,
All you have to do is
because they
look at
let
how they
partisanship creep into it,
right. Look at how they covered Trump. The numerous stories about invoking the 25th Amendment over nothing. I mean, he is a vigorous person. I don't think Nancy Pelosi is the most articulate person in the world, but nobody can look at that 84-year-old woman and not say she's not capable of doing her job. I mean,
Well,
some older people are, some aren't. It's a case by case thing. But when you look at what they did when Trump maybe stumbled down a step once, and you look at how they covered up for Biden, that's what keeps coming out in all of this. Is it's so obvious. They're so bad at it. The contrast is so apparent, and that's why I said it's kind of like the emperor's new clothes. And you have these progressive elites who just are seeing reality in a way that the rest of the country isn't. I mean, don't forget, in February of 2024, there was an ABC poll in which a vast majority of Democrats said Biden is too old to run for reelection.
well, that sums it up. As you pointed out in your column, Peter, and we'll leave it there, is that it was an open secret. It wasn't. It was only a secret in Washington among the press corps. It
Right.
was the reverse. The American people knew, and they didn't want Biden to run for office. And the average voter, I think, is more nuanced and more sensitive about this. The aging process is capricious. It hits all of us. It hits people at different times and ways. And I think people were not without sympathy for the president, but they're going to be harder on a press corps that doesn't do its job. But I'm with you, Peter. It's a new year, and there's a new opportunity for us to get back on track in the media. That'll do it for us right now. Don't go away. We'll be back in a moment. Andy Walworth will be back. He's got an interesting interview coming up. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of Real Clear Politics, and you've been listening to Peder Zane, my guest today.